Ayana lived in a small mud hut at the very edge of the village, where the fields ended and the river began. The river had always been a part of her life, an ancient presence that flowed past her door like a quiet guardian. Her parents had drowned in that river when she was just a baby. No one ever explained how or why. All she knew was that the river took them, and from that moment, it became her only family. Each morning, Ayana swept the compound, fetched water, and did whatever little work the villagers threw her way for a piece of yam or some coins. But when the sun began to lower and her chores were done, she always found her way to the riverbank. She would sit on a wide rock beneath an old fig tree and talk, not to herself, but to the river. She told it everything: how she felt invisible in the village, how the other children wouldn't play with her, how the elders avoided her as if she carried a curse. Most villagers thought Ayana was odd. Some said she was possessed. Others warned their children not to go near her. "That's the girl who speaks to water," they'd whisper. "She's not right in the head." Still, Ayana returned to the river every day. She didn't care what they said. In her heart, she believed the river was listening, even if it never made a sound. One afternoon, as the sky turned gold and Ayana poured her thoughts into the flowing current, she noticed an old woman standing a few steps away. The woman was wrapped in the layers of cloth, her eyes sharp, yet kind. She said nothing for a long time. Then, just as she turned to leave, she looked back and said, "Keep speaking. It hears you louder than you think." Before Ayana could ask what she meant, the woman was gone. From that day, Ayana spoke to the river with more purpose. She didn't just share her pain, she asked questions. She thanked it for listening. She even sang to it. The river didn't reply, but she often thought its ripples grew softer when she arrived, its current slower, as if leaning in to hear her better. To Ayana, the river wasn't just water. It was memory. It was voice. It was the only presence in her life that never interrupted her, never judged her, never walked away. It held her secrets, and in return, she gave it her loyalty. The villagers may have seen a lonely girl talking to nothing, but Ayana knew what they didn't. The river might be silent, but it was never deaf. The calm rhythm of Ayana's days began to shift the moment Chief Bakari summoned the villagers to the central square. Standing tall in his embroidered robes, the chief spoke with grand gestures and greedy eyes. He announced that the land along the river, fertile, ancient, sacred, would be leased to a group of outsiders. They would build machines, dig into the earth, and mine the soil for profit. In return, the village would receive development, new roads, new wells, new promises. The villagers murmured in uncertainty. Some clapped out of fear, others out of confusion. A few protested, but their voices were quickly drowned. The next day, the loudest among them, a bold farmer named Sifu, was found beaten and barely breathing behind the market stalls. His wife packed their things and left silently that night. Everyone understood. Speak against Bakari, and you would suffer. The mining began within a week. Trees were cut, paths were carved through sacred groves. The riverbank was fenced. Heavy machines groaned day and night. Ayana watched in horror as men in helmets and boots waded into the river with pipes and tools. The water, once clear and gentle, began to cloud with filth. Then the sickness came. It started with the animals. Goats refused to drink. Chickens lay dead in the grass. Soon, children developed rashes. Old men coughed blood. The village healer couldn't explain it. The elders gathered beneath the tree of wisdom and whispered what no one else dared say. The river was angry. Ayana stood before the elders and spoke. "You all knew this land was alive. You sang to it in your youth. You prayed here during famine. and now you've sold its skin for silver." Her voice trembled, but didn't break. "You can build on the river's bones," she said, "but don't expect peace." They laughed, some out of discomfort, some to dismiss her, some because it was easier to mock a girl than face the truth. She was told to go home. That evening, Ayana walked to her usual spot by the river. The fig tree still stood, though its leaves drooped with dust. The water moved sluggishly. A sour smell clung to the air. She sat down, knees to chest, and stared into the dark current. "Why don't you stop them?" she whispered. Her voice was hoarse. "You're mighty. You've swallowed storms and carried entire trees. You remember my parents. You remember everything. Why do you stay silent now?" No answer came. She spoke louder, desperation cracking through her words. "You're alive. I know you are. Please, answer me. Do something. Anything." The river remained still for a long moment. Then, ever so faintly, the surface rippled without wind. A vibration, like a hum, rose from the water. It wasn't a sound with shape or meaning, just a low, strange resonance that vibrated in Ayana's bones. She stilled, holding her breath. The noise faded as quickly as it had come. She leaned forward, eyes wide, unsure if she imagined it. But deep down, something had changed. The river had listened, and it had stirred. The sun scorched the earth day after day, and no clouds came to offer relief. The drought crept slowly across the village like an invisible thief, stealing water, stealing crops, stealing hope. Fields cracked open like dry skin. Wells ran dry. Children walked farther each morning with their mothers, returning with near-empty gourds and heavy feet. Even the elders, who had lived through famine and war, began to worry aloud. And the river, it was disappearing. Where once Ayana had seen wide silver waters rushing past the fig tree, now there was only a narrow stream, brown and tired. The riverbed revealed secrets that had been hidden for years. Bones of animals, broken clay pots, stones with strange carvings. It no longer hummed. It no longer carried songs. It wheezed like an old man in his final days. Still, Ayana came. She did not sit on her usual rock. It was too far from the shriveled edge. Instead, she knelt in the cracked mud and whispered. She whispered questions. Please. Memories. She didn't care if anyone saw her. The village had other things to worry about now. No one bothered mocking the orphan girl anymore. She placed her hand flat against the soil, warm and dry as ash. "If you can still hear me," she said, "don't stay silent, not now." Each day she returned, and each day silence. Then, one evening, as the last light of the sun dipped beneath the horizon, and the fig tree cast a crooked shadow across the shore, Ayana felt something. The wind stilled, the air thickened, and from the narrow line of water, something shifted. A sound, soft, barely there, like reeds brushing together or a breath through hollow wood. "Ayana." She froze. It wasn't her imagination. It wasn't the wind. It was a voice, thin and echoing, as if spoken from deep beneath water. Her name had never sounded like that before. Heavy, sacred, ancient. She crouched low, heart racing. "I hear you," she whispered. "I'm here." The river did not speak in sentences. It poured feelings into her, a flood of sensation and memory. Her vision blurred, and then she was no longer by the river. She was elsewhere, somewhere both real and not. She saw her parents again. They were standing by the river, arguing with someone, a shadowed figure. She could not see the face, but she saw the hands. Rough, calloused, familiar. Her parents turned to leave. Then those hands pushed. There was no accident, no stumble. They were thrown. The water pulled them under, while the figure stood on the shore, watching. Ayana gasped. Her knees buckled. She collapsed into the dry mud, trembling, breath shallow. The images faded, but the truth remained, heavier than stone. The river had finally spoken, and it had spoken in truth. Tears ran down her face, carving paths through the dust on her cheeks. She had always believed the river held memories. She never imagined it held this. Murder. Her parents had been silenced, and the killer had walked free all these years, praised, feared, obeyed. Chief Bakari. She now understood why he had poisoned the land, sold the river, silenced dissent. It wasn't just greed, it was control. He had killed for it once. He would do it again. Ayana touched the edge of the fading stream, her fingers brushing the surface. It was cold, colder than it should have been. She wasn't just a girl by the river anymore. She was the only one it spoke to. And now, she had a truth to carry. A secret too dangerous to whisper. But she would not run from it. The river had trusted her. She would not fail it. Ayana didn't sleep that night after the river whispered the truth. Her mind spun with grief, rage, and confusion. The images haunted her, the familiar hands, the cold silence, the shadow of betrayal. But more than anything, one question rang in her head. Why had the river chosen her? The next morning, Ayana left her hut early, not to the river, but toward the outskirts of the village where the forest thickened. There, beneath a twisted tree wrapped in cloth charms, lived the old woman who had once spoken to her in passing. People called her mad. Others called her dangerous. But Ayana knew better now. She found Mama Mosey seated on a mat of woven reeds, grinding something into a bowl. The old woman didn't look surprised to see her. "So," Mama Mosey said, without looking up. "It spoke." Ayana nodded. Mama Mosey motioned for her to sit. "You carry a heavy truth now. It's not just your pain anymore. It's justice waiting to be born. But justice is not given freely. It tests the soul that carries it." Ayana leaned forward. "Tell me what to do." "The river is a spirit," Mama Mosey said softly. "Older than this village, older than names. It does not care for kings or titles. It speaks only to those who are pure in heart, those who come with clean hands and open wounds." Ayana asked, "Why me?" "Because you kept speaking, and you kept listening." The old woman explained what had to be done. The river's full power slept beneath its surface, guarded by spirits of memory and truth. To awaken it, Ayana had to offer something precious. Not gold, not food, but something from the soul. A sacrifice. "You must go to it at midnight," Mama Mosey said. "Alone. Give what you love most. And be ready. It may show you beauty, or it may show you horror. You cannot choose. You can only accept." That night, Ayana lit a small fire and sat beside it, cradling the object in her hands. A thin, silver necklace with a blue stone, the only thing she had left of her mother. It had been given to her as a child, found clutched in her mother's hand after the drowning. It had always made her feel close to something lost. As the village slept and the moon climbed high, Ayana walked alone to the river. The water was still, like glass. The fig tree's shadow stretched long across the shore. The machines were silent for once. The land held its breath. Ayana stepped into the shallow edge. She raised the necklace, kissed it gently, and whispered, "This is for you, Mama. And for the truth." She dropped it into the water. The reaction was immediate. The river surged violently, waves rising where none should be. A spiral of water coiled upward like a snake, and Ayana was pulled forward, swallowed by the current. She didn't struggle. She fell into darkness, then light. Ayana stood in a place that felt underwater and yet dry. Blue light shimmered around her. Figures floated. Spirits of villagers long gone, faces from old tales, shapes made of mist and memory. They watched her with quiet eyes. One stepped forward, her mother, not as she died, but as she lived, strong, beautiful, and fierce. Ayana ran toward her, but could not touch her. Instead, the spirits gathered around and formed a circle. In the center, the river spoke, not with a voice, but through a vision clearer than any dream. She saw Chief Bakari again, younger, smiling, her parents arguing with him at the riverbank, refusing to give up their land. He handed them a drink, poisoned. They collapsed. He dragged their bodies into the river, washing his hands in the same water. Ayana cried out. She wanted to turn away, but the river held her gaze. When it ended, she was standing on the riverbank again, wet, shaking, breathless. The moon had moved. The wind had returned. She was not alone anymore. The river had shown her everything. And in her mind, a word echoed, not spoken, but stamped into her spirit. Reveal. The sun rose slowly over the village, casting long shadows across the meeting grounds. Word had spread quickly. Ayana, the girl who spoke to the river, had called for a public gathering. People came out of curiosity, some out of concern, and many out of mockery. They brought their skepticism, their laughter, their disbelief. Ayana stood alone near the riverbank, her figure small against the rising sun. The villagers surrounded her in a half circle. On the far side, seated beneath a decorated canopy, was Chief Bakari, dressed in his finest robe, surrounded by guards and advisors. Someone from the crowd jeered, "Is the river going to tell us bedtime stories now?" Another laughed, "Maybe she'll cry, and the river will flood." Bakari stood slowly, grinning. "Let the orphan speak," he said mockingly. "Let's hear what the water has to say." Ayana stepped forward, heart pounding but her face calm. She looked straight at Bakari, then turned to the people. "I have heard the river's voice," she said, clear and steady. "It knows what he did." The laughter faded slightly. Some exchanged glances. Bakari chuckled, arms crossed. "The river? So now it gives testimonies." Ayana didn't blink. "You poisoned my parents. You lied to this village. You have taken land that was never yours. The river remembers, and it has shown me everything." Silence. Bakari lifted a hand to speak, but then something shifted behind him. The river stirred. A sudden, unnatural ripple coursed through the surface. The wind was still, but the water began to rise. Not splash, rise, slowly, deliberately, like a curtain lifting on a stage. Waves formed behind Bakari, towering higher than any tide the village had ever seen. The sound was not of rushing water, but of something ancient waking. People gasped. Some stumbled back. Bakari turned to look, and the blood drained from his face. The river moved again. A voice rose. Not Ayana's, not human. It was deep, rough, endless. A voice like thunder buried in ocean. A voice like rain crashing on stone. "Bakari!" The voice echoed from the waves themselves, shaking the ground beneath everyone's feet. "Thief of land, betrayer of oaths, poisoner of blood, liar to the living mocker of the dead." With each line, the water surged higher. "Confess," Ayana whispered, but Bakari turned and ran. The crowd screamed as the water surged forward, not a wave, but a hand. A massive, roaring wall that bent and reached for him. He slipped on the stones, tried to grab hold of a post, but the current wrapped around his body like a coil of fate. With one final roar, the river pulled Bakari under. Not a drop touched the villagers, only him. He disappeared into the depths. No body floated back. No scream escaped the water. The river calmed. The waves sank. The surface smoothed. Silence returned. Then the villagers dropped to their knees, one by one, some in fear, others in reverence. Even the elders bowed their heads. The ground beneath them had heard the truth, and the water had delivered its justice. Ayana stood still. Tears filled her eyes, not because she was victorious, but because she had finally understood the cost of truth. Her parents were gone. The river had answered, but it had taken something again. She stepped back from the edge and looked at the people. They were watching her now, not as a strange girl, not as a cursed child, but as something else. She said nothing. The river had spoken. There was nothing more to add. In the days that followed Bakari's vanishing, the village felt different. Not just quieter, deeper, as if the earth itself had taken a breath. The machines were removed. The mining halted. The fence was torn down by the villagers themselves, many doing so with trembling hands. The riverbank was left bare, but healing. The crops began to return, first with cautious green sprouts, then fuller, healthier plants. Goats and cattle came back to the watering spots they had once avoided. Birds returned to sing from the fig tree above the river. It was as though the land had been exhaling suffering, and now, at last, it had rested. The elders, humbled and ashamed, gathered at the meeting tree and offered Ayana a place among them. They spoke in the formal tones, asking her to be a leader, a keeper of wisdom, a voice of justice. She listened quietly, then shook her head. "I am not meant to sit in circles of men," she said. "My place is by the water." The people accepted her decision without question. They had seen what she could do, or rather, what the river had done through her. Mama Mosey, the quiet guardian of forgotten knowledge, left without warning. One morning, her hut was empty, swept clean. A single clay jar of river water sat at its centre, sealed and left behind. No one saw her again. It was said she returned to the forest where the old spirits walk, to watch from the shadows as balance was restored. And so Ayana remained. She built a small shelter near the fig tree, where the wind always whispered, and the river hummed like a song only she understood. Children who once teased her now came to sit in quiet circles at her feet. She taught them not how to command the river, but how to listen to it, how to respect it, how to live in peace with the things older and stronger than themselves. She did not speak often. She never claimed power. But when she did speak, people listened. In time, they called her the keeper of the river, not because she ruled it, but because she carried its memory with care. She marked each year not by seasons, but by the sounds the water made. She would know when danger was near before it arrived. She would know when to guide people away from the edge, and when to remind them what had once happened when they ignored the voice of the land. She never wore her mother's necklace again. She did not need to. The river had accepted it, and in return, given her something far greater: purpose. Years passed. The village changed. Children grew. Elders faded. But Ayana remained, her presence a quiet thread that bound the village to its spirit. And whenever someone new asked who she was, the villagers would reply, "She's the one who speaks to the river." And sometimes, when the river chooses, it speaks back. And at the end of it all, in the space between silence and story, the tale leaves behind one final truth. Some voices echo through mountains, others flow quietly through rivers, but both carry truth, and truth always finds its way home.